Welcome, dear listener, to another gentle journey through the shadows of history. Tonight, we invite you to settle back, perhaps pull a soft blanket closer, and allow your mind to drift into the towering stone walls and flickering torchlight of medieval castles. You are safe here in your comfortable present, wrapped in modern warmth and convenience, as we explore a time when luxury meant something entirely different than it does today. Please consider subscribing to the channel and drop a comment below. Imagine yourself stepping through time, cue footsteps echoing against cold stone floors where rushes have been scattered to absorb the dampness that seeps eternally through massive walls. The air carries the mingled scents of wood smoke, tallow, candles, and herbs strewn among the floor coverings, a world where comfort was measured not in thread count or temperature control, but in the thickness of your woolen cloak and the proximity to the great hall's fire. Here, in these towering fortresses that dominated the medieval landscape, the very concept of luxury was shaped by constant awareness of mortality, warfare, and the endless struggle against the elements. Tonight, we shall discover what it truly meant to live in luxury within these fortress walls, where the most powerful lords and ladies of the realm made their homes. We'll walk alongside those who served them, uncover the secrets hidden within ancient stones, and witness the elaborate ceremonies that defined their existence. In these medieval strongholds, luxury was not merely about possessions. It was about power, protection, and the delicate dance of survival in an uncertain world. The wealthy merchant's silk-lined chamber, the lord's private chapel with its stained glass windows, the lady's solar, where she might retreat from the constant press of castle life. These spaces represented not just comfort, but precious islands of privacy and beauty in a world where both were rare commodities. The castles we imagine from fairy tales bear little resemblance to the reality of medieval fortress living. Behind their imposing facades lay a complex world of hierarchy, ritual, and constant adaptation to harsh conditions that would challenge even the hardiest souls of our modern age. These stone giants, built to withstand siege and storm, housed not just noble families, but entire communities of craftsmen, servants, soldiers, and clergy, each playing their part in the intricate dance of medieval court life. Please consider subscribing to the channel and hit the like button. It motivates and helps me keep bringing videos in this format. If you'd like to hear about a specific topic, leave a comment below. I'll show you in the video when your topic is chosen. Picture yourself awakening in the pre-dawn darkness of a great castle chamber. Not as its lord, but as its steward, the man upon whose shoulders rests the smooth operation of this stone behemoth that houses perhaps 200 souls. The rushes beneath your feet crackle softly as you rise from your narrow bed, the straw-filled mattress releasing the scent of dried herbs that have been mixed with the bedding to ward off fleas and mice. Your breath forms small clouds in the chill air, for even the steward's quarters is positioned strategically near the lord's chambers for quick access. Receive only residual warmth from the great hall's fires below. The bell tower sounds the call to lauds, its bronze voice rolling across the courtyards and through the thick walls, marking the rhythm that will govern every soul within these walls until Compline signals the day's end. You dress quickly in the dim light filtering through the single narrow window, pulling on woolen hose, a linen shirt, and a long tunic that marks your station fine enough to command respect, practical enough to withstand the day's endless demands. The castle is already stirring. Can hear the soft shuffle of servants' feet on stone stairs, the creak of wooden doors, the distant lowing of cattle in the bailey as the day's first milking begins. Your first destination is the great hall, where the embers of yesterday's fire still glow beneath a layer of ash in the massive central hearth. Here, luxury reveals itself in layers. The lord's high table, elevated on its dais, bears traces of the previous evening's feast. Silver salt cellars, pewtered plates that gleam even in the morning's pale light. Fine linen cloths that will be carefully washed and reused until they fall apart. Below the dais, long wooden tables stretch across the hall, scarred by years of use, their surfaces marked by countless meals and the occasional dagger point. The walls, hung with tapestries that represent a fortune in imported wool and silk, provide both decoration and insulation against the stone's eternal chill. You pause to examine the rushes scattered across the floor, noting where they have become too soiled and compressed to serve their purpose. This flooring, changed perhaps monthly if the household is prosperous, represents a constant balance between comfort and economy. Fresh rushes, mixed with sweet herbs like lavender and rosemary, create a surface that absorbs, spills, provides slight cushioning underfoot, and releases pleasant fragrances when crushed. Yet, they also harbor scraps of food, small bones tossed from tables, and other detritus of daily life. The castle's cats patrol these spaces constantly, lean shadows that keep the rodent population manageable, while hunting dogs sleep near the hearth, ready to warm their master's feet during the day's formal proceedings. The morning's first great task awaits in the kitchens, where the preparation of meals for the castle's inhabitants requires military-like precision and planning. You descend stone steps worn smooth by countless feet, entering a realm where luxury takes the form of abundance, carefully managed and distributed according to strict social hierarchy. The head cook, a woman whose authority in this domain rivals your own, greets you with a recitation of supplies and concerns that will shape the day's meals. In the great larders, sides of beef and mutton hang from iron hooks, their surfaces darkened with age, but still sound beneath. Barrels of ale and wine line the walls, their contents representing not just sustenance, but social currency in a world where hospitality determines reputation. The castle stores reveal the true nature of medieval luxury, not simply having food, but having enough food of sufficient quality to maintain the lord's reputation for generous hospitality, while ensuring that every mouth within the walls is fed according to their station. Great wheels of cheese, some as tall as a man's waist, age on wooden shelves, their rinds developing the complex molds that indicate proper aging. Sacks of grain, carefully monitored for signs of spoilage or pest intrusion, represent security against famine and siege. Each sack bears the mark of its origin: wheat from the lord's domain lands, oats from tribute paid by vassal knights, barley purchased with silver at distant markets. Barrels of salt, more precious than most realize, ensure the preservation of meat and fish through the long winter months. This white gold, transported across treacherous roads from coastal saltworks or distant mines, determines whether the household will feast on fresh meat year-round or subsist on tough, dried provisions. During the lean months, amphorae of oil, imported at great expense from Mediterranean lands, stand like ceramic soldiers along the larder walls, their contents representing months of a common man's wages. These oils, pressed from olives that never grew in northern climates, will flavor the dishes served at the Lord's table, while common servants make do with animal fats rendered from the kitchen scraps and whatever herbs can be coaxed from the castle gardens. Honey, stored in great ceramic crocks, provides the primary sweetening for noble table's cane sugar, being a luxury so rare that a single pound might cost more than a war horse. The golden liquid, harvested from hives maintained in the castle's outer bailey, represents not just sweetness, but the patient work of countless bees in the skilled hands of the castle's beekeeper. Knowledge of these temperamental insects makes him nearly as valuable as the castle's master-at-arms. As the morning progresses, you witness the awakening of a complex social organism, each member playing their part in maintaining the illusion of effortless abundance that defines noble luxury. In the stables, grooms tend to destriers whose bloodlines are as carefully maintained as those of their owners, brushing coats that gleam like burnished metal, checking hooves for stones, examining every muscle and sinew for signs of strain or injury. These war horses, each worth more than a prosperous farm, represent the pinnacle of medieval breeding programs, their training as rigorous as any knight's education. Palfrey and hackneys occupy adjacent stalls, gentler mounts suitable for ladies, riding in everyday travel. The tack decorated with brass fittings and leather dyed in the Lord's colors. The blacksmith's forge already glows, red hot, in its stone chamber. The bellows worked by an apprentice, whose arms have grown strong from months of maintaining the perfect heat for working iron and steel. Here, luxury reveals itself in the quality of metal and the skill required to shape its swords that will hold their edge through countless battles. Its armor that turns aside the fiercest blows, locks and hinges that will secure castle doors for generations. The smith himself, his leather apron scarred by sparks and his hands permanently stained by soot and metal filings, commands respect throughout the castle, for his craft stands between the inhabitants and the chaos that constantly threatens to overwhelm their ordered world. In the chapel, a jewel of stonework and stained glass set within the castle's heart, the chaplain prepares for morning mass. His movements deliberate and reverent as he arranges precious altar vessels that represent both spiritual devotion and material wealth. Silver chalices, their surfaces worked with scenes from the Passion, catch and reflect the colored light streaming through windows, whose glass was shipped piece by precious piece from distant workshops. Illuminated manuscripts rest on carved wooden lecterns, their vellum pages decorated with gold leaf and pigments that cost more than most men earn in a lifetime. Ultramarine blue made from lapis lazuli, transported along Silk Road trade routes. Vermilion red, extracted from rare minerals, and blacks, so deep they seem to absorb light itself. Reliquaries lined the chapel walls, each containing fragments of saints' bones that cost fortunes to acquire and authenticate. These elaborate containers, wrought from precious metals and studded with gems, house tiny pieces of finger bones, scraps of clothing or hair strands that represent direct connections to the divine. The Lord's family owns relics of St. James, whose shell-marked shrine at Compostela drew pilgrims from across Europe, and a splinter of wood claimed to be from the Tasse. True Cross itself a relic, whose authenticity matters less than the faith it inspires and the prestige it confers upon its owners. The morning bell for prime has rung, and you must now orchestrate the first of many ceremonial displays that define castle life, the breaking of fast in the great hall. This seemingly simple meal reveals layers of meaning that extend far beyond mere nourishment, for in medieval society, every act of eating becomes a statement of status, loyalty, and divine blessing. You oversee the transformation of the great hall from its nighttime state tables pushed against walls, sleeping pallets rolled away, dogs shooed from the warmest spots near the dying embers into a theater of social hierarchy, where every gesture carries weight and significance. The servants work with practiced efficiency, unfolding linen cloths across the trestle tables, their movements choreographed by years of repetition. Each cloth tells the story of the household's prosperities. Some bear subtle stains from wine or beziel, grease that no amount of washing can completely remove, battle scars of countless feasts that add character rather than shame. The finest cloths reserved for the high table where the Lord and his family will sit come from Flemish looms and bear patterns, so intricate they seem to shimmer in the morning light, filtering through the hall's narrow windows. Salt cellars, positioned according to strict protocol, divide the tables into invisible but absolute territories. Those seated above the salt enjoy higher status, finer food, and the right to speak freely, while those below must content themselves with simpler, fair, and respectful silence, unless addressed. You personally oversee the placement of the Lord's chair, a massive construction of oak and iron that serves as both seat and throne. Its high back, carved with the family's heraldic devices and polished by generations of use, its cushions stuffed with down from the Lord's own swans and covered in silk imported from Constantinople. Transform this instrument of authority into a symbol of comfort that few will ever experience. The chair's positioning on the dais exactly centered, facing the length of the hall allows the Lord to survey his domain like a king holding court. And indeed, within these walls, his authority approaches the absolute power claimed by monarchs. The Lord's arrival transforms the hall from a place of preparation into a living tableau of medieval social order. He enters with measured steps, his clothing a careful display of wealth and taste, a long robe of finest wool dyed in colors that announce his status to all who see him. Scarlet, reserved by law and custom for the highest nobles, proclaims his right to command. The fabric itself, woven so finely that it feels like liquid against the skin, represents the work of master craftsmen whose skills passed from father to son in closely guarded guild traditions. His belt, worked in leather and decorated with silver fittings, supports a dagger whose handle bears the family arms in precious metals and carefully chosen gems. Behind him walks his lady, her presence immediately altering the hall's atmosphere through the subtle perfume of rosewater and herbs that clings to her garments. Her gown, cut in the latest fashion from the French court, flows around her feet in carefully calculated folds that conceal the practical reality of thick woolen stockings and sturdy shoes beneath. The dress itself represents months of work by skilled seamstresses, each seam perfectly straight, each pleat precisely positioned, each decorative element placed with mathematical precision. The fabric, a deep blue that rivals the color of summer skies, has been dyed with woad and madder in combinations that create shades no common cloth could achieve. Her headdress, an elaborate construction of silk veils and golden circlets, announces her married status while framing her face in a way that enhances natural beauty through careful artifice. The ceremonial hand-washing that precedes the meal elevates basic hygiene into religious ritual. Servants approach bearing ewers of warmed water scented with herbs, their movements as carefully choreographed as any court dance. The water itself, heated in copper vessels polished to mirror brightness, has been infused with lavender and rosemary that release their fragrances into the morning air. Fine linen towels, embroidered with the family arms, await to dry hands that must be spotless before touching sacred bread or blessed wine. This washing serves practical purposes, removing the night's accumulated dust and grime while simultaneously demonstrating the household's abundance of clean water, fine soap, and delicate fabrics. The blessing of food transforms sustenance into sacrament, the chaplain's Latin words rising through air thick with the smoke of rushlight and tallow candles. His voice, trained in the chant traditions of great monasteries, fills the hall with sacred sound that reminds all present of their dependence on divine providence for their daily bread. The bread itself, baked from finest wheat flour, appears almost white compared to the darker loaves that feed the common servants, a visible reminder of the hierarchy that extends even to the grain used for different social classes. Wine, blessed and shared according to strict protocol, flows from flagons whose silver surfaces reflect distorted images of the hall's occupants, creating a dreamlike atmosphere where reality blends with ceremony. As the meal progresses, you observe the intricate dance of service that keeps food moving from kitchen to table in an endless stream of perfectly timed presentations. Servants glide between the tables, bearing platters of bread still warm from the ovens, their crusts golden and crackling with the heat of baking. Bowls of pottage, thick with vegetables and grains, provide substantial nourishment for those of middle rank, while the high table receives delicate preparations that showcased the kitchen's skill eggs poached in wine, small birds stuffed with herbs and spices, cheese preparations that required days of careful aging and preparation. The sounds of the hall during this morning meal create their own music, the soft conversation of diners, the clink of pewter against pewter, the rustle of rushes underfoot as servants move between tables, occasional bark of a dog hoping for scraps. These sounds blend into a gentle symphony of civilized life, a harmony that masks the constant vigilance required to maintain such order within stone walls that echo with memories of siege and battle. Through it all, the great hearth fire crackles and pops, sending occasional sparks up the chimney while casting dancing shadows on tapestried walls that depict scenes of courtly love and knightly valor. The morning's repast concludes with another ritual washing, servants again bearing ewers and towels to cleanse hands that have touched shared food and communal vessels. This final cleansing marks the transition from sacred meal to secular business, from the spiritual nourishment of blessed bread and wine to the practical concerns that govern daily life within the castle's embrace. As the lord and lady withdraw to their private chambers, the hall transforms once and tables cleared, rushes swept. It's a great space prepared for the day's administrative duties and social occasions that form the true work of noble governance. As the morning advances toward the canonical hour of terce, your responsibilities as steward expand beyond the ceremonial into the relentlessly practical realm of castle management. The fortress that seems so permanent, so invincible from a distance, reveals itself upon closer inspection to be in constant need of maintenance, repair, and vigilant oversight. Stone may endure for centuries, but the mortar between the stones requires periodic renewal. The wooden structures within the walls demand replacement every generation. And the complex systems that bring water, remove waste, and maintain warmth operate in delicate balance that any disruption can destroy. You climb the narrow spiral staircase that leads to the castle's upper reaches, your hand trailing along walls whose stones bear the tool marks of long-dead masons. Each step, worn smooth by countless feet, tells its own story, the deep hollow, in the center where generations of inhabitants have placed their weight. The slight lean that indicates settling in the ancient foundations below. The staircase itself, built with military precision, curves clockwise to disadvantage right-handed attackers ascending from below, while arrow slits at regular intervals provide defending archers with protected positions from which to rain death upon invaders. Even in this most domestic of settings, the reality of warfare shapes every architectural decision. From the battlements, the view encompasses not just the surrounding countryside, but the intricate network of dependencies that make castle life possible. Fields stretch toward distant horizons, their patterns revealing the three-field system that ensures continuous agricultural production. One field planted with winter wheat, another with spring oats or barley, the third lying fallow to restore its fertility. Peasant cottages, the landscape like scattered seeds, their thatched roofs and whitewashed walls marking the homes of those whose labor supports the castle's inhabitants. Each cottage represents a family bound to the land through feudal obligations, their lives regulated by seasons and customs as rigid as any monastic rule. The castle's own gardens spread across terraces carved from the hillside, their geometric patterns revealing the medieval mind's desire to impose order upon nature's chaos. Here, luxury reveals itself through the careful cultivation of herbs and vegetables that add flavor and nutrition to the castle's diet. Raised beds contain mint, thyme, and rosemary that will season the Lord's table, while larger plots nurture onions, leeks, and cabbages that form the foundation of the servants' daily pottage. A separate garden, tended by the castle's women under the lady's direction, grows the medicinal plants whose properties mean the difference between life and death when sickness strikes. Feverfew for headaches, willow bark for pain, comfrey for wounds, and chamomile for sleepless nights. The fish ponds, arranged in step series down the hillside, represent one of the castle's most valuable resources and a testament to medieval ingenuity in managing natural abundance. These artificial lakes, fed by diverted streams and carefully maintain dam systems, provide fresh fish year-round without dependence on uncertain supplies from distant rivers or seas. Carp, introduced from eastern lands at enormous expense, grow fat in the muddy waters, while pike patrol the depths like freshwater wolves. During Lent, when church law forbids the consumption of meat, these ponds become the difference between feast and famine. Their scaly inhabitants transforming religious obligation into opportunities for elaborate preparation and presentation. Returning to the castle proper, you inspect the great kitchens during the height of their daily activity, witnessing luxury defined not by abundance alone, but by the skill and knowledge required to transform raw ingredients into the complex dishes that grace noble tables. The head cook, her authority absolute within her domain, directs a staff of assistants whose specialized knowledge has been passed down through generations of kitchen service. The spit boy, his face red from the heat of constantly turning roasts, maintains the perfect rotation that ensures even cooking of joints of meat that weigh more than he does. The pastry cook, her hands dusted with flour, shapes elaborate constructions that will house savory fillings meat pies built like miniature castles, complete with battlements and banners that mirrored the architecture surrounding them. The spice cabinet, secured with locks as substantial as those protecting the castle's treasury, contains powders and seeds worth their weight in silver. Pepper, transported grain by precious grain across continents and seas, adds fire to the Lord's dishes while demonstrating his connections to trading networks that span the known world. Cinnamon bark, stripped from trees growing in lands so distant their names sound like poetry. Perfumes, sauces that transform simple meats into exotic delicacies. Cloves, nutmeg, ginger, and saffron. Each spice represents months of a common man's labor, yet the castle's cook uses them with the casual confidence that marks true luxury. The afternoon brings its own rhythm of activities, each governed by customs as immutable as natural law. In the solar, the castle's most private chamber, the lady holds court among her women, their needlework creating tapestries and clothing that will serve both practical and decorative purposes. The very existence of this chamber, with its large windows facing south to capture maximum light, represents luxury beyond the reach of common focus space dedicated solely to leisure. An artistic creation, heated by its own fireplace, is furnished with chairs and cushions that transforms sitting into comfort rather than mere necessity. Here, conversation flows as smoothly as the silk threads being worked into complex patterns, topics ranging from courtly gossip to philosophical questions debated in the great universities. Books, those rarest of possessions, rest on carved lectern volumes, copied by monks whose lives were devoted to preserving and transmitting knowledge. A psalter, its illuminated capitals, glowing with gold leaf and precious pigments, serves both religious and aesthetic purposes. A romance, recently composed by a troubadour poet, tells stories of knights and ladies whose adventures mirror and idealize the lives of those who listen to its verses. These manuscripts, each one unique, irreplaceable, and enormously valuable, represent the medieval equivalent of entire libraries, their contents memorized and shared through the oral traditions that keep culture alive in an age when literacy remains the privilege of the few. As evening approaches and the shadows lengthen across the castle's courtyards, you oversee the preparation for the day's final great ceremony, the evening feast that will transform the great hall into a theater of hospitality and display. Servants labor to transform tables set for the morning's simple breaking of fast into elaborate settings worthy of the most discriminating guests. Fresh rushes, mixed with herbs and flower petals, carpet the floor, their fragrances rising with each footstep. Candles, made from precious beeswax rather than common tallow, fill the hall with steady light that neither smokes nor stinks, their flames reflected in polished metal surfaces until the stone chamber seems to glow with its own inner fire. As twilight deepens beyond the narrow windows, Torches flared to life in their iron brackets, their flames dancing in the evening drafts that find their way through even the most carefully mortared stones. The castle settles into its evening rhythm, a gradual transformation from the day's practical concerns to the night's more formal ceremonies. You stand for a moment in the great hall's entrance, surveying the scene that will soon unfold, nightly recreation of the social bonds that hold the medieval world together, played out in the light of fire and candle against walls that have witnessed generations of such gatherings. This daily cycle of ceremony and service, of hierarchy carefully maintained and hospitality generously offered, represents the true luxury of castle life, not mere comfort, but the security that comes from knowing one's place in an ordered world. The satisfaction of traditions maintained across centuries, and the deep pleasure found in rituals that connect earthly life to divine purpose. In the morning, this cycle will begin anew, as it has for countless generations, as it will for generations yet to come, the rhythm of stone and straw and ceremony continuing its eternal stance within these walls that stand as monuments to human ambition and divine grace. In the year of our Lord 1122, within the sun-warmed walls of the ducal palace at Poitiers, a child was born whose very existence would reshape the map of medieval Europe and redefine the possibilities available to women of royal blood. Eleanor, future Duchess of Aquitaine, entered the world during an age when female power was more often whispered about in shadowed corners than proclaimed from battlements. Yet her birth marked the beginning of a life that would see her rule lands larger than those of the French king himself. Married to monarchs, mother to kings, so survived long enough to watch her descendants claim thrones across the continent. The duchy she inherited was itself a marvel of medieval prosperity and culture, stretching from the Loire Valley in the north to the Pyrenees in the south, encompassing territories that produced the finest wines, supported bustling trade routes, and fostered a flowering of literature and learning that made the Aquitaine court the envy of Europe. Picture, if you will, the landscape of Eleanor's youth, rolling hills covered with vineyards whose grapes would become wine traded as far as England and the Holy Land, its rivers flowing toward the Atlantic carrying vessels loaded with salt from coastal marshes, and cities like Bordeaux and La Rochelle, where merchants from distant lands gathered to exchange goods, ideas, and the coin that funded courtly magnificence. The palace at Poitiers, where Eleanor spent her formative years, represented luxury of a distinctly different character from the fortress castles that dominated the northern French landscape. Built for pleasure as much as protection, its architecture celebrated the gentler aspects of noble life-wide windows that welcomed southern light, gardens where troubadours could perform beneath flowering trees, halls designed for dance and music rather than martial display. The very stones seemed to exhale warmth and welcome, their honey-colored surfaces carved with decorative flourishes that spoke of a court where aesthetics mattered as much as military might. Eleanor's education, extraordinary for a woman of any era, reflected both her father's progressive views and the practical necessities of ruling a domain. Its complexity would challenge any administrator, while other noble daughters learned needlework and household management. Eleanor studied Latin with scholars whose learning rivaled that of monastery schools, mastered the intricate legal codes that governed her duchy's various territories, and absorbed the political wisdom necessary to navigate the treacherous currents of feudal allegiance and papal authority. Her tutors, drawn from the finest minds available to the Aquitaine court, recognized early that this young woman possessed an intellect and determination that could make her a force to be reckoned with. In the male-dominated world of medieval politics, the young Eleanor's daily routine would have included hours spent in the palace's scriptorium, where illuminated manuscripts from across Europe were copied and preserved. Here, surrounded by the gentle scraping of quills on parchment and the soft voices of scribes correcting each other's work. She encountered the great literature of her age, classical texts preserved through centuries of monastic devotion, contemporary works of theology and philosophy, and the emerging corpus of courtly romance that would forever change European culture. The vernacular poetry that flourished in her grandfather's court had elevated the Languedoc, the Occitan language of southern France, into a literary medium capable of expressing the most refined emotions and sophisticated ideas. Music filled the palace at Poitiers with a richness unknown in the grimmer fortresses of northern lords. Troubadours, those poet-musicians who invented what we now call romantic love, Keege, found in Eleanor's court both patron and inspiration. Their songs, performed to the accompaniment of lutes and viols, transformed the crude realities of feudal marriage into elaborate fantasies of devoted service and spiritual longing. Eleanor herself learned to play multiple instruments, her slender fingers coaxing melodies from stringed instruments whose very possession marked her as a person of extraordinary refinement. The songs she heard in her youth tales of knights undertaking impossible quests for the love of unattainable ladies. Stories of passion that transcended earthly constraints would later influence her own approach to marriage, politics, and the delicate art of maintaining power in a world that viewed its female authority with deep suspicion. The court's festivities during Eleanor's girlhood combined religious observance with secular celebration in ways that modern minds might find difficult to comprehend. Christmas celebrations lasted 4 weeks, incorporating everything from solemn masses that filled the palace chapel with clouds of incense and the ethereal voices of trained singers, to elaborate feasts where the finest products of the duchies. Kitchens competed with imported delicacies for the attention of guests who traveled from across Europe to participate in Aquitaine hospitality. Easter brought its own cycle of ceremonies, from the austere observances of Lent to the explosive joy of Resurrection Sunday. When the palace gardens bloomed with flowers gathered to decorate altars and halls alike. During these formative years, Eleanor observed firsthand the complex negotiations that maintained her father's authority over a duchy composed of numerous semi-independent territories, each with its own traditions, privileges, and potential for rebellion. She watched as he balanced the competing demands of powerful vassals who commanded their own armies, church officials whose spiritual authority could challenge temporal power, and merchant guilds whose prosperity funded the court's magnificence, but who expected privileges and protections in return for their support. These early lessons in statecraft, absorbed through daily observation rather than formal instruction, would prove invaluable when she eventually faced similar challenges as Duchess, Queen, and Dowager ruler. The young Eleanor's wardrobe reflected both her exalted status and the particular aesthetic sensibilities of the Aquitaine court. Her gowns, cut from silks that had traveled the length of the Mediterranean and wools so fine they felt like liquid against the skin, were dyed in colors that proclaimed her rank deep purples extracted from murex shells, brilliant reds derived from Kermes insects, and blues so intense they seemed to hold fragments of sky within their fibers. The garments themselves were works of art, their seams invisible, their proportions calculated to enhance natural beauty while demonstrating the skill of craftswomen. Its techniques were guarded trade secrets passed from mother to daughter across generations. Eleanor's jewelry, much of it inherited from her mother and grandmother, represented not merely personal adornment, but political statements about the continuity and legitimacy of Aquitaine rule. Circlets of gold, worked with precious stones, announced her status to all who saw her, while rings bearing the ducal seal gave her words the weight of law when pressed into warm wax. Necklaces of pearls, each sphere a perfect product of distant seas, demonstrated the reach of trade networks that brought luxury to Poitiers from the farthest corners of the known world. Brooches and pins, seemingly decorative, often concealed practical purposes, holding garments in place, securing veils, providing quick access to small knives that any wise noblewoman carried for protection in an age when violence might erupt. Without warning, as Eleanor approached marriageable age, the question of her future became a matter of international importance. The Duchy of Aquitaine, with its vast territories, profitable trade routes, strategic position between the French kingdom and the Spanish realms, represented a prize that could shift the balance of power across Europe. Suitors and their representatives began appearing at the Poitiers court with increasing frequency, each offering military alliances, trade agreements, or territorial exchanges that might convince Eleanor's father to bestow his daughter's hand and, with it, eventual control over one of Europe's richest domains. The negotiations surrounding Lena's marriage revealed the intricate web of feudal obligations, power, politics, and royal ambitions that governed medieval diplomacy. Marriage contracts in this era were documents of staggering complexity, addressing not only the immediate union of two individuals, but the future inheritance rights of potential children. The military obligations each party would owe to the other, the administration of vast territories with different legal traditions, and the delicate question of how to balance loyalty to multiple overlords whose interests might eventually conflict. Eleanor's marriage would determine not only her personal destiny, but the fate of millions of people living within her duchy's borders. When her father died unexpectedly during a pilgrimage to Santiago de Compostela, Eleanor found herself, at barely 15 years of age, the richest and most powerful unmarried woman in Europe. The speed with which King Louis VI of France moved to secure her marriage to his son reveals both the enormous value of her inheritance and the precarious nature of female independence in the medieval world. Within weeks of her father's death, Eleanor found herself traveling northward toward Paris, her vast retinue a moving display of Aquitaine's wealth and power that transformed every stop along the journey into an impromptu festival. The royal wedding of Eleanor and the future Louis VII took place in the Cathedral of Saint-André in Bordeaux, a ceremony that united not merely two young people, but two distinct civilizations, whose differences would prove more profound than anyone anticipated. Picture the scene on that July morning in 1137, the cathedral's soaring Gothic arches filled with the greatest nobles of France and Aquitaine, their banners creating a forest of silk and wool that rustled with every movement of the summer breeze flowing through the opened doors. The bride herself, resplendent in cloth gold that had been woven specifically for this occasion, represented a vision of southern elegance that must have seemed almost exotic to the northern French courtiers who filled the cathedral's nave. Wedding gown, a masterpiece of medieval textile art, incorporated elements that told the story of her heritage and proclaimed her future status. The golden fabric, shot through with silver threads that caught and reflected the cathedral's candle flames, had been woven on looms in Constantinople before making its way westward along trade routes that connected the Byzantine Empire to the markets of Western Europe. The garments cut, following the latest fashions from the sophisticated courts of southern France, emphasized the wearer's youth and beauty while maintaining the dignity appropriate to a future queen. Precious stones, carefully selected for their symbolic as well as aesthetic value, adorned the dresses. Bodice sapphires for wisdom, emeralds for fertility, pearls for purity. Each gem a prayer made visible in crystalline form. The young Louis, soon to be king, presented a marked contrast to his radiant bride, where Eleanor embodied the sunny confidence of the South. Louis reflected the more austere traditions of northern French kingship. His clothing, though rich, emphasized function over fashion. His manner, suggesting the monastic influences that had shaped his education during years when he was never expected to inherit the throne. The unexpected death of his elder brother had thrust him into a role for which his temperament seemed poorly suited, a reality that would become increasingly apparent as his marriage to Lenore unfolded across the years that followed. The wedding feast that followed the ceremony transformed the ducal palace at Bordeaux, into a stage for displaying the combined wealth and power of the French crown and the Aquitaine duchy. Tables groaning under the weight of elaborate dishes demonstrated the abundance that flowed from Eleanor's southern domains, wine from vineyards whose grapes had been tended for centuries, game from forests where hunting rights were jealously guarded privileges, fish from coastal waters that teemed with maritime wealth. The very air seemed thick with prosperity, perfumed by exotic spices, and filled with music that blended the courtly traditions of North and South into harmonious celebration. Yet, beneath the surface magnificence, careful observers might have detected signs of the tensions that would eventually tear this marriage apart. Eleanor's retinue, accustomed to the sophisticated cultural life of Poitiers, found the French court's atmosphere oppressively pious and intellectually sterile. The troubadours, who had followed their duchess northward, discovered that their songs of courtly love and chivalric adventure were viewed with suspicion by clerics who saw in such literature dangerous challenges to church teaching about marriage and morality, the very qualities that made Eleanor so attractive as a political ally. Her intelligence, her independence, her cultural sophistication would prove problematic in a royal marriage that demanded submission to masculine authority and conformity to northern French traditions. The early years of Eleanor's marriage to Louis VII revealed the profound differences between the courtly culture she had inherited and the royal environment she now inhabited. The Capetian court, centered in Paris and the Ile-de-France, operated according to principles that emphasized royal authority, clerical influence, and military prowess over the aesthetic refinements and intellectual sophistication that had flourished in Aquitaine. Eleanor found herself expected to play the role of queen consorts, supportive, curative, and ultimately subordinate in a court that had little appreciation for the qualities of mind and spirit that had made her such an effective ruler in her own right. The physical environment of the royal palaces where Eleanor now lived reflected these cultural differences in ways both subtle and obvious. The royal palace on the Isle de la Cite, though impressive in its way, lacked the gracious appointments and comfortable amenities that had made the palace at Poitiers such a pleasant dwelling. Stone walls, built for defense rather than beauty, created interiors that remained cold and damp even during the warmest months. Windows, kept small for security reasons, emitted little of the natural light that had filled Eleanor's southern chambers with warmth and brightness. Gardens, when they existed at all, emphasized practical herbs and vegetables over the ornamental flowers and fragrant plants that had surrounded Eleanor's youth with beauty and delight. Eleanor's attempts to introduce elements of Aquitaine culture into the French court met with resistance that ranged from passive indifference to active hostility. Her suggestion that troubadours be invited to perform at royal celebrations was met with clerical objections to poetry that celebrated earthly love rather than divine devotion. Her preference for clothing that followed southern fashions was criticized as vanity, inappropriate to royal dignity. Even her intellectual interests, her love of books, her participation in theological discussions, her correspondence with scholars from across Europe were viewed as potentially dangerous distractions from a queen's proper duties of prayer, charity, and maternal devotion. Eleanor's crusading army, recruited from her own Aquitaine territories and equipped at her personal expense, represented a significant military force whose contribution to the crusading effort would be substantial. Her decision to bring with her a retinue of noble ladies, each accompanied by their own servants and equipped for an extended campaign, created what amounted to a mobile court that maintained the cultural standards of home, even in the harsh environment of military campaigning. These women, dressed in practical garments that nonetheless maintained the elegance expected of their rank, adored to the crusade an element of civilization that contrasted sharply with the crude masculinity that typically characterized medieval military expeditions. The journey eastward through the Byzantine Empire provided Eleanor with her first direct exposure to the sophisticated culture of Constantinople, where the remnants of Roman imperial tradition had evolved into something far more refined than anything available in Western Europe. The Byzantine court, with its elaborate ceremonials, its preservation of classical learning, and its tradition of powerful empresses who wielded authority in their own right, offered Eleanor a glimpse of alternative possibilities for female power that would profoundly influence her later career. The luxuries available in Constantinople silks that made Western textiles seem coarse by comparison. Spices that transformed simple ingredients into culinary masterpieces. Books containing knowledge lost to the West reminded Eleanor of what she had given up when she married into the austere French royal house. The military disasters that befell the Second Crusade, combined with rumors about Eleanor's relationship with her uncle Raymond of Antioch, provided the justification that both Eleanor and Louis needed to end a marriage that had become increasingly unbearable for both parties. The annulment proceedings, conducted with papal approval on grounds of consanguinity that had been conveniently overlooked at the time of their wedding, freed both monarchs to pursue more compatible partnerships while allowing them to maintain their dignity and reputation. Eleanor's return to Aquitaine as an independent duchess, no longer bound by the constraints of French royal protocol, marked the beginning of the most remarkable phase of her extraordinary career. The 8 weeks that elapsed between Eleanor's annulment from Louis VII and her marriage to Henry Plantagenet, Duke of Normandy and Count of Anjou, demonstrated both her political acumen and her determination to maintain control over her own destiny. This rapid remarriage, conducted with minimal ceremony at the Cathedral of St. Pierre in Poitiers, united Eleanor's vast Aquitaine territories with Henry's Norman and Angevin lands, creating a dominion that would soon encompass more of France than was controlled by the French king himself. The marriage also brought together two of the most formidable personalities of their adjuvanter, now in her 30s and possessed of vast experience in statecraft, and Henry, 11 years her junior, but already recognized as one of Europe's most capable military commanders and administrators. The ceremony itself is deliberately understated compared to Eleanor's first royal wedding, nevertheless carried profound implications for the future of European politics. Witnesses to the exchange of vows could hardly have imagined they were observing the creation of an empire that would dominate Western European affairs for the next 3 centuries. Eleanor, wearing a gown of deep blue silk that emphasized her maturity and dignity rather than youthful beauty, spoke her marriage vows with the confidence of a woman who had learned to navigate the treacherous waters of medieval politics through bitter experience. Henry, his auburn hair catching the cathedral's candlelight, and his gray eyes already showing the calculating intelligence that would make him one of history's most effective monarchs, accepted not merely a wife, but a partner whose political skills would prove essential to his success. When Henry Plantagenet ascended the English throne as Henry II in 1154, Eleanor found herself Queen of England, Duchess of Aquitaine, an effective ruler of an empire that stretched from the Scottish borders to the Pyrenees. This Angevin Empire, as historians would later call it, represented the largest and most powerful political entity in Western Europe, rivaling in extent, if not in organization, the domain once controlled by Charlemagne. Eleanor's role in governing this vast territory would demonstrate that medieval queenship could encompass far more than the traditional duties of producing heirs and maintaining courtly ceremony. The early years of Eleanor's second marriage were marked by an almost constant round of travel, as the royal couple moved between their various domains to maintain personal control over territories its local nobility might otherwise have asserted dangerous independence. Picture Eleanor's court as a great traveling household, its progress across the countryside marked by lines of pack horses, carrying the portable wealth that enabled royal government to function effectively wherever the monarch's chose to establish temporary residence. Wagons groaned under the weight of gold and silver vessels, illuminated manuscripts, fine clothing, and countless other items that transformed whatever castle or palace received the royal visit into a center of imperial magnificence. Personal traveling household included not only the servants necessary for maintaining royal comfort, but also the clerks, scribes, and administrators whose work kept the machinery of government functioning even as the court moved from England to Normandy to Aquitaine with bewildering frequency. These men, trained in the complex legal traditions that governed each of Henry's territories, carried with them the documents, seals, and precedents that made it possible to issue judgments, grant privileges, and resolve disputes according to local customs wherever the royal court happened to be residing. The Queen's own chambers, recreated in castle after castle as the court progressed through its domains, represented a careful balance between comfort and portability. Tapestries, rolled and transported in leather cases, could transform the coldest stone chamber into a warm and welcoming space within hours of the court's arrival. Furniture, designed to disassemble quickly and reassemble reliably, provided the familiar comforts that made constant travel bearable. Eleanor's personal effects, carefully packed in iron-bound chests that could withstand the rigors of medieval transportation, included not only clothing and jewelry, but also books, writing materials, and the personal items that maintained continuity of identity across the varied landscapes of her empire. The birth of Eleanor's children with Henry II, Henry the young king, Richard, Geoffrey, and John provided the succession security that had been lacking during her first marriage, while creating new political complications as these princes matured into ambitious young men with their own territorial ambitions. Eleanor's role as mother to future kings required delicate balancing of maternal affection with political necessity, ensuring that each son received appropriate training for his eventual role, while preventing the rivalries between them from destroying the empire their parents had created. Eleanor's influence over her sons' education reflected her own scholarly interests and her understanding of the intellectual skills necessary for effective rule in an increasingly complex political environment. The princes learned not only the martial arts expected of medieval nobility, but also Latin, law, literature, and the principles of administration that would enable them to govern territories with diverse legal traditions and cultural expectations. Their education included exposure to the troubadour culture that Eleanor had brought northward from Aquitaine, ensuring that the future rulers of the Angevin Empire would appreciate the artistic and intellectual achievements that distinguished civilized courts from mere military strongholds. The court culture that developed during Eleanor's years as Queen of England represented a unique synthesis of influences drawn from across her vast domains. English administrative efficiency, Norman military prowess, Angevin legal sophistication, and Aquitaine artistic refinement combined to create an environment that attracted scholars, artists, and ambitious nobles from across Europe. The court's patronage of literature, particularly the emerging Arthurian romances that would profoundly influence European culture, reflected Eleanor's understanding that cultural prestige enhanced political authority in ways that mere military force could never achieve. Eleanor's relationship with Thomas Becket, initially positive but eventually strained by the conflicts that arose from his appointment as Archbishop of Canterbury, revealed the complex interplay between royal authority and church independence that characterized medieval politics. Her initial support for Henry's attempt to bring ecclesiastical courts under royal control reflected her practical understanding of the administrative challenges posed by competing jurisdictions, while her later attempts to mediate between her husband and the archbishop demonstrated her skill at diplomatic negotiation in impossible circumstances. Eleanor's decision to support her sons' rebellion against their father in 1173 marked a turning point that would defy the remainder of her life. This revolt which contemporary chroniclers described as the greatest crisis to face the Angevin Empire since its creation, pitted mother against husband in a conflict that transcended personal relationships to encompass fundamental questions about the nature of royal authority and the rights of adult heirs to exercise real power in their own territories. The failure of the rebellion resulted in Eleanor's capture and subsequent imprisonment, captivity that would last for 16 years and transform her from active ruler into a carefully controlled political symbol. Yet, even in confinement, Eleanor continued to exercise influence through her correspondence with supporters across Europe. Her careful cultivation of relationships with church officials who might intercede on her behalf, and her patient preparation for the day when changed circumstances might restore her freedom and political relevance. The locations of Eleanor's imprisonment, primarily Winchester Castle and Saram, were chosen not only for their security, but also for their ability to provide the comfortable accommodations appropriate to a queen's dignity even in captivity. Her chambers, though restricted in terms of movement and communication with the outside world, nonetheless maintained the basic amenities of royal life. She retained a small household of trusted servants, access to books and writing materials, and the ability to receive carefully supervised visits from family members and church officials. During these years of enforced retirement, Eleanor occupied herself with activities that reflected both her intellectual interests and her political acumen. She maintained extensive correspondence with abbesses and abbots across her former domains, using religious language to convey political messages that might otherwise have been suppressed by her captors. Her patronage of religious houses, conducted through intermediaries, ensured that her name remained associated with charitable works that enhanced her reputation for piety, while maintaining networks of loyalty that would prove valuable when her circumstances eventually changed. The death of Henry the young king in 1183 created a succession crisis that made Eleanor's political expertise too valuable to keep locked away. Henry II's decision to release his wife from imprisonment and allow her to participate in negotiations for Richard's succession reflected both his pragmatic recognition of her abilities and his awareness that she commanded loyalties, particularly in Aquitaine, that no one else could duplicate. Eleanor's return to active political life after 16 years of captivity demonstrated remarkable resilience and an undiminished capacity for the complex maneuvering that medieval politics demanded. Eleanor's management of the transition from Henry II to Richard I showcased political skills that had been refined rather than diminished by her years in captivity. Her ability to secure the loyalty of nobles who might otherwise have challenged Richard's succession. Her diplomatic negotiations with church officials who support legitimize the new king's authority. Her careful distribution of rewards and punishments to consolidate the new reign all demonstrated that her understanding of power remained as acute as ever. The Third Crusade posed new challenges that tested Eleanor's abilities as both Queen Mother and Imperial Administrator. Richard's absence in the Holy Land left England vulnerable to the ambitions of his brother John and the external threats posed by Philip Augustus of France, requiring Eleanor to exercise powers that technically belonged to other officials, while maintaining the fiction that she was merely acting as regent for her absent son. Her success in preserving Richard's throne during his extended absence represented perhaps the greatest triumph of her long career, demonstrating that even in her 70s, Eleanor remained one of Europe's most formidable political operators. Eleanor's final years, marked by the loss of Richard and the troubled reign of John, saw her wielding influence through wisdom and experience rather than formal authority. Her role in securing John's succession, despite his obvious inadequacies, and the superior claims of Arthur of Brittany, demonstrated her pragmatic understanding that political stability sometimes required supporting imperfect candidates rather than ideal ones. Her defense of Mirabeau against Arthur's siege at the age of 80 showed that age had not diminished her courage or her understanding of military necessity. When Eleanor died at Fontevraud Abbey in 1204, she left behind not only a vast political legacy, but also a transformed understanding of what medieval queenship could accomplish. Her tomb, carved from stone quarried in the very territories she had governed, bears an effigy that shows her reading a book, a final testament to the intellectual curiosity and scholarly devotion that had marked her entire extraordinary life. The abbey itself, where she had retreated during her final years, became a symbol of the synthesis between worldly power and spiritual devotion that had characterized her approach to medieval rulership. From our perspective, it's separated by centuries from Eleanor's world. Her achievements seemed almost impossible. A woman who outlived both her royal husbands, governed territories larger than most modern nations, survived 16 years of imprisonment, and returned to exercise effective power well into her 80s. Yet perhaps her greatest legacy lies not in the territories she controlled or the battles she won, but in her demonstration that intelligence, determination, and political skill could enable even medieval women to transcend the limitations that society attempted to impose upon them. Descend with me now beneath the ancient stones of Dover Castle, where centuries of secrecy have carved hidden pathways through the living chalk cliffs that guard England's southeastern shores. Here, in tunnels that wind like serpents through the white rock, generations of builders have created a subterranean world that mirrors and supports the mighty fortress above, yet remains invisible to casual observers who see only the imposing towers and walls that dominate the landscape for miles around. These secret passages, some dating from the castle's earliest construction and others carved during moments of desperate military necessity, tell stories of medieval ingenuity, wartime desperation, and the eternal human desire to create hidden spaces where privacy and security might flourish away from the constant scrutiny of public life. The chalk beneath Dover Castle, soft enough to carve with hand tools, yet strong enough to support the weight of massive stone structures above, provided medieval engineers with an ideal medium for their subterranean ambitions. Picture yourself following flickering torchlight through passages whose walls bear the tool marks of long-dead miners, their chisels and hammers gradually hollowing chambers and corridors from rock that had lain undisturbed since the ancient seas receded to create the English Channel. The chalk itself, formed from countless millions of tiny marine creatures whose compressed remains created these gleaming white cliffs, seemed to welcome human intervention. Its surface smooth enough to finish with simple tools, yet durable enough to maintain structural integrity across centuries of use. The earliest passages beneath Dover Castle were carved during the reign of Henry II, when the fortress was being rebuilt into the magnificent structure that would earn the title key to England. These initial excavations come following natural fissures in the chalk that provided starting points for human engineering, created storage chambers where the castle's garrison could maintain supplies, secure from both enemy action and the dampness that plagued surface storage areas. The constant temperature maintained within the chalk in summer, protected from freezing in winter, made these underground chambers ideal for preserving grain, wine, and other provisions that might spoil in the variable conditions above ground. As you move deeper into the tunnel system, following passages that branch and converge like underground rivers, imagine the careful planning that created this hidden infrastructure. Each corridor was positioned to serve specific purposes while maintaining the secrecy that made such passages valuable routes that could move personnel and supplies without detection. Chambers that could house activities too sensitive for public observation and escape routes that might prove essential if the castle above fell to besieging forces. The engineering required to create such passages while maintaining the structural integrity of the massive fortress above represents a level of technical sophistication that modern observers often underestimate when considering medieval capabilities. The air within these tunnels carries the particular atmosphere of ancient enclosed spaces, cool and slightly humid. It's tinged with the mineral scent of chalk and the faint mustiness that accumulates in chambers where air circulation follows patterns established centuries ago. Ventilation shafts, disguised as decorative elements in the castle above or hidden within the natural contours of the cliff face, ensure that these underground spaces remain habitable while maintaining their concealment from external observation. The medieval engineers who designed these systems understood that the most elaborate underground facility would prove useless if its occupants could not breathe comfortably, or if telltale signs of habitation revealed its existence to enemy observers. Along the tunnel walls, niches carved at regular intervals once held oil lamps whose flames provided the only illumination available to those who used these passages for their intended purposes. The soot stains that mark these alcoves tell stories of countless nighttime journeys, secret meetings, and clandestine activities that required both light and concealment. Some niches, larger than would be necessary for simple lamps, may have held religious images or protective talismans, reminders that even in these hidden depths, medieval people sought the comfort and protection that faith could provide in uncertain times. The main tunnel system connects several large chambers whose purposes can only be guessed at from the architectural evidence that remains. One substantial room, its ceiling supported by pillars carved from the living chalk, contains the remains of what appear to be stone benches or platforms, whose arrangement suggests they may have served ceremonial or judicial functions. The acoustics of this chamber, enhanced by its careful proportions and the sound-absorbing qualities of chalk walls, would have made it ideal for confidential meetings where every word needed to be heard clearly by authorized participants while remaining completely inaudible to potential eavesdroppers above or beyond the chamber's confines. Another chamber, connected to the main system by passages that twist and turn with apparent randomness, shows evidence of having been used for storage purposes that required unusual security measures. Iron rings, driven deep into the chalk walls, once supported chains or ropes that may have secured particularly valuable items, perhaps documents too sensitive for normal archives, treasure too precious for standard strongrooms, casing, or prisoners too important for ordinary cells. The chamber's isolation from other parts of the tunnel system would have made it virtually impossible to locate without detailed knowledge of its existence and precise directions for reaching it through the maze of interconnected passages. The most intriguing discovery within Dover's underground complex involves passages that seem to connect the castle proper with locations well beyond its visible boundaries. These extended tunnels, some of which may stretch for considerable distances through the cliff system, suggest that the castle's builders envisioned defensive scenarios that would require movement and communication capabilities extending far beyond the fortress walls. The possibility that secret passages might emerge at concealed locations along the Dover coastline, providing alternative means of receiving supplies or communications even during prolonged sieges, demonstrates the sophisticated strategic thinking that informed medieval military architecture at its highest level. Exploration of these extended passages requires extreme caution, as centuries of geological activity, water damage, and structural changes in the castle above have created conditions that modern safety standards would consider unacceptable. Some tunnels have partially collapsed, their chalk roofs unable to withstand the accumulated stresses of time and weather. Others have flooded, either through changes in groundwater levels or through this penetration of surface water that has found new paths through the porous chalk. Yet enough remains accessible to provide tantalizing glimpses of a defensive system whose full extent and capabilities may never be completely understood. The psychological impact of these hidden passages on both defenders, Akays, and potential attackers would have been substantial, creating an atmosphere of uncertainty and hidden capability that enhanced the castle's defensive value beyond its visible fortifications. Enemies contemplating an assault on Dover Castle would have been forced to consider not only the obvious challenges posed by its massive walls and towers, but also the unknown threats that might emerge from hidden positions. The possibility that their own communications might be observed through concealed vantage points, and the unsettling awareness that the fortress they faced might possess capabilities that remained completely invisible until the moment they were deployed against attacking forces. The construction techniques used to create these passages revealed sophisticated understanding of both engineering principles and the unique properties of chalk as a building material. Medieval workers, guided by master craftsmen whose knowledge had been passed down through generations of castle builders, employed methods that seemed deceptively simple yet achieved results of remarkable durability and functionality. The tools used: iron picks, wooden shovels, rope and pulley systems for removing excavated material were basic by modern standards. Yet, in skilled hands, they could carve through solid rock with precision that modern machinery might struggle to match. The spoil removed during tunnel construction presented logistical challenges that required careful planning and execution. Thousands of tons of chalk had to be excavated, transported to the surface, and disposed of without revealing the scope or nature of the underground work being conducted. Much of this material was likely incorporated into the castle's above-ground construction projects, the white chalk providing excellent mortar when properly processed, or used to create the smooth surfaces that characterize the finest medieval stonework. Some excavated material may have been dispersed across the surrounding countryside, its gradual distribution helping to maintain the secrecy that made these passages valuable for their intended purposes. The workforce required for such extensive underground construction would have represented a significant investment in both human resources and operational security. Skilled miners, stone carvers, and engineers had to be recruited, trained in the specific requirements of the project, and maintained in conditions of strict confidentiality throughout the construction period. The temporary housing, feeding, and payment of such workers would have created logistical challenges comparable to those faced by any major construction project, with the additional complication that all activities had to be conducted with minimal external visibility or awareness. The modern archaeological investigation of Dover Castle's underground complexes has revealed layers of construction, modification, and use that span nearly a millennium of English history, each era leaving its distinctive marks on passages and chambers that have served purposes ranging from medieval storage to World War II command centers. As archaeologists carefully peel back centuries of accumulated debris, their discoveries paint an increasingly complex picture of how successive generations adapted these hidden spaces to meet changing military, political, and social needs, while preserving the essential secrecy that made such facilities valuable across dramatically different historical periods. The earliest archaeological evidence suggests that some form of underground activity at Dover predates even the Norman conquest, with signs of Saxon excavation in areas that would later be incorporated into the medieval tunnel system. These primitive works, little more than shallow caves carved into the cliff face, may have served as storage areas for the Saxon burh that preceded the Norman castle, or perhaps as refuges during Viking raids that periodically devastated the Kent coastline. The crude tool marks that characterize these early excavations contrast sharply with the sophisticated engineering that would transform the site during the reign of Henry II. Yet they established patterns of underground use that would influence all subsequent development. The transition from Saxon to Norman construction methods can be traced through subtle changes in carving techniques, tunnel proportions, and architectural details that reflect the different cultural traditions and engineering capabilities of successive builders. Norman work, characterized by precise measurements, mathematical proportions, and attention to structural details that would ensure long-term stability, gradually replaced and incorporated the rougher Saxon excavations into a comprehensive system, designed to serve the military and administrative needs of a major royal fortress. Perhaps the most intriguing archaeological discovery involves a chamber that appears to have served religious or ceremonial purposes. Its walls decorated with carved symbols whose meaning remains tantalizingly unclear to modern scholars. These decorations, executed with considerable skill and artistic sophistication, include geometric patterns that may reflect mathematical principles known to medieval scholars, religious symbols that suggest connections to both Christian and pre-Christian traditions, in what appear to be heraldic devices, whose identification could potentially resolve questions about the chamber's original purpose and the identity of those who used it for their mysterious activities. The symbols themselves, carved directly into the chalk walls with tools fine enough to create precise details while maintaining the overall coherence of complex compositions, demonstrate artistic capabilities that seem inconsistent with the utilitarian purposes typically associated with underground military facilities. Some designs incorporate elements found in contemporary illuminated manuscripts, suggesting that whoever created these decorations possessed access to the highest levels of medieval artistic tradition. Other symbols appear unique to this location, possibly representing a symbolic language or ceremonial system specific to the activities conducted within this hidden chamber. More mysterious still is the discovery of documents written on parchment, of exceptional quality and sealed with wax that bears impressions of official seals, whose exact identification remains uncertain. The text of these documents, written in Latin using abbreviations and terminology that suggest official rather than private correspondence, contains references to individuals and activities that do not appear in any known historical records. Some passages seem to describe transactions or agreements involving significant sums of money and territorial rights, while others contain coded language whose meaning has so far resisted scholarly interpretation. The archaeological evidence suggests that the tunnel system remained in active use throughout the medieval period, with modifications and additions reflecting changing political circumstances and evolving military technologies. Construction phases that can be dated to the reigns of Edward I, Edward III, and Henry V demonstrate that successive monarchs recognized the value of Dover's hidden capabilities and invested resources in maintaining and improving facilities, provided strategic advantages unavailable elsewhere in the kingdom during the 14th century. Significant modifications to the tunnel system created new chambers, specifically designed for what appears to have been administrative or judicial activities. These rooms, characterized by stone platforms that may have served as desks or tribunal benches, acoustic features that would have facilitated formal proceedings, and ventilation systems more sophisticated than those serving purely storage functions, suggest that Dover's underground complex served purposes that extended well beyond military logistics into the realm of government activities that required absolute secrecy. The discovery of a chamber containing the remains of what appears to have been a sophisticated laboratory or workshop has puzzled archaeologists and historians attempting to understand the full range of activities conducted within Dover's hidden spaces. Equipment fragments, chemical residues, specialized tools suggest experimental or manufacturing activities that would have been highly unusual for a military installation. Yet, the security measures surrounding this chamber, multiple locked doors, restricted access passages, and ventilation systems designed to contain rather than disperse airborne materials indicate that whatever took place here was considered extremely sensitive by those who authorized its operation. Analysis of environmental samples taken from various locations throughout the tunnel system has revealed traces of exotic materials that would have been difficult to obtain through normal medieval trade channels. Residues that appear to be derived from rare minerals, plant extracts from distant geographical regions, metallic compounds whose composition suggests sophisticated chemical knowledge point toward activities that connected Dover's underground complex to intellectual and scientific networks that spanned medieval Europe. The presence of such materials raises questions about the castle's role in preserving and advancing knowledge that might have been suppressed or restricted in more public settings. Perhaps most intriguingly, recent archaeological work has uncovered evidence suggesting that some portions of the tunnel system were designed to accommodate activities that required precise astronomical observations, chamber orientations that align with celestial phenomena, openings positioned to emit light during specific seasons or times of day, and what appeared to be measuring devices carved directly into stone surfaces hint at scientific activities that combine practical and theoretical knowledge in ways that modern scholarship is only beginning to understand. The possibility that Dover Castle's underground complex included facilities for advanced mathematical, astronomical, or navigational work adds new dimensions to our understanding of medieval scientific capabilities and the institutional support that such activities required to flourish in an age when intellectual innovation often faced suspicion or active suppression. The water management systems discovered throughout the tunnel complex demonstrate engineering sophistication that rivals anything achieved in the medieval world above ground. Carefully carved channels, designed to collect and direct groundwater seepage while preventing flooding in critical areas, create an intricate network of drainage that has functioned effectively for more than 8 centuries. These channels, lined with specially prepared mortar that has proven remarkably resistant to water damage, redirect natural water flow in ways that maintain optimal humidity levels for storage while providing fresh water supplies for human occupancy during extended periods of use. Some chambers contain evidence of sophisticated filtration systems that could purify water supplies even under siege conditions when surface sources might be contaminated or cut off entirely. Stone filters, constructed from carefully graded materials that remove impurities while preserving beneficial minerals, demonstrate knowledge of water treatment principles that would not be rediscovered by mainstream engineering until centuries later. The presence of such systems suggests that Dover's underground complex was designed to support extended independent operation, possibly for months or even years, without reliance on external resources or communication. The cultural significance of Dover Castle's secret passages extends far beyond their immediate military or administrative functions, representing a medieval mindset that understood the power of hidden knowledge and concealed capabilities in maintaining political authority and social order. These underground spaces embody fundamental medieval concepts about the relationship between visible power and invisible influence, between public ceremony and private decision-making, between the authority that commands through display and control that operates through secrecy and careful manipulation of information. Consider how the very existence of such passages would have affected the psychology of those who lived and worked within the castle above. Knowledge of hidden chambers and secret routes would have created a sense of layered reality, where the apparent completeness of the visible castle was understood to be merely the surface of a more complex structure, whose true extent remained known only to a privileged few. This awareness would have permeated daily life within the fortress, influencing relationships between different levels of the social hierarchy and creating subtle but persistent reminders that power in the medieval world operated through channels that remained largely invisible to casual observation. The cultural impact extended beyond the castle walls into the broader medieval imagination. Our secret passages and hidden chambers became powerful symbols in literature, folklore, and popular culture. The Romance traditions that flourished during the high medieval period frequently featured underground spaces as settings for dramatic encounters, secret meetings, and the resolution of complex plot elements that could not be addressed through conventional narrative means. These literary treatments both reflected and reinforced popular fascination with the hidden dimensions of power, creating cultural expectations that associated true authority with the ability to operate beyond the constraints of public visibility. The architectural principles embodied in Dover's underground complex influenced castle construction throughout medieval Europe. As builders and military engineers recognized the strategic advantages offered by concealed infrastructure, the techniques developed for carving passages through chalk were adapted for use in different geological conditions, while the organizational concepts that governed the layout of hidden chamber systems were applied to fortifications built on entirely different foundations. This technological and conceptual transfer created a tradition of underground construction that would continue to evolve throughout the medieval period and beyond. The religious and ceremonial aspects of these hidden spaces reveal another dimension of their cultural significance as medieval society understood. The spiritual implications of spaces that existed beneath the earth yet remained connected to the divine order that governed all creation. Some chambers within the Dover complex show evidence of having been consecrated for religious use, their walls bearing carved crosses and other sacred symbols that transformed utilitarian spaces into sanctified environments where prayer and contemplation could take place away from the distractions and obligations of public religious observance. The presence of what appeared to be private chapels within the underground system suggests that the castle's most important inhabitants valued the ability to worship in complete privacy, perhaps for reasons that extended beyond personal preference into the realm of political or diplomatic necessity. During periods when religious affiliation might determine political allegiance, ethical disputes could have serious secular consequences. The ability to practice faith away from public scrutiny could mean the difference between political survival and catastrophic downfall. The educational and intellectual functions served by these hidden chambers reveal a sophisticated understanding of the relationship between knowledge and power in medieval society. Spaces that may have served as private libraries, study areas, or meeting places for scholarly discussion provided environments where dangerous ideas could be explored, controversial texts could be preserved, and intellectual networks could operate without attracting unwanted attention from religious or secular authorities who might view certain forms of learning with suspicion or hostility. The discovery of what appeared to be teaching materials within some chambers' wax tablets for practicing writing, mathematical instruments, and fragments of texts dealing with subjects ranging from natural philosophy to legal theory suggest that Dover's underground complex may have served as an alternative educational environment where young nobles could receive instruction in subjects that were not readily available through conventional channels. This hidden curriculum, delivered in spaces that ensured complete discretion, may have provided crucial advantages to those who would eventually assume positions of leadership within the Angevin Empire. The social dynamics, created by knowledge of these secret spaces, would have added layers of complexity to life within the castle. As different individuals possessed different levels of access to hidden areas and the activities that took place within them, this graduated secrecy created hierarchies within hierarchies. Formal rank might be modified or even superseded by access to information or spaces that remained unknown to those who possessed greater official authority but lacked the specific knowledge or permissions required to penetrate the castle's hidden dimensions. The psychological pressure created by living within such an environment, knowing that one's own activities might be observed through hidden vantage points, that conversations might be overheard through concealed listening posts, that movements through supposedly private areas might be monitored from passages whose existence remained unknown, would have produced a distinctive form of medieval paranoia that combined legitimate security concerns with genuine uncertainty about the extent of surveillance capabilities that surrounded daily life within the fortress. The maintenance requirements for such an extensive underground system created their own cultural implications, as the knowledge and skills necessary to preserve these hidden facilities had to be passed down through generations of specialized workers, whose discretion was absolutely essential to the system's continued effectiveness. These craftsmen, whose expertise made them invaluable, yet whose knowledge made them potentially dangerous, occupied unique positions within castle society, simultaneously privileged through their access to secrets and constrained by the obligations that such access imposed. The economic impact of constructing and maintaining these underground facilities represented substantial investment in infrastructure whose value could never be publicly acknowledged or demonstrated. 8. The resources devoted to hidden chambers and secret passage, skilled labor, expensive materials, ongoing maintenance costs had to be justified through benefits that remained largely invisible to those who might question such expenditures. This created interesting tensions between the practical requirements of castle administration and the political necessities that made such hidden capabilities valuable enough to justify their substantial costs. The international implications of Dover's underground complex extended far beyond England's borders, as foreign diplomats, visiting nobles, and potential enemies who gained knowledge of these hidden capabilities would have carried information about Dover's defensive advantages back to their own courts and military establishments. This intelligence would have influenced strategic planning throughout Europe, as potential attackers were forced to consider unknown capabilities, while allies sought to understand and potentially replicate the advantages that such hidden infrastructure provided. The technological innovations developed during the construction and operation of these underground facilities contributed to advances in engineering, architecture, and military science that would influence European development for centuries to come. Techniques for excavating stable passages through unstable ground, methods for providing adequate ventilation in underground spaces, and solutions for managing water infiltration in below-ground chambers would all prove valuable in contexts far removed from their original military applications. The legacy of Dover's secret passages can be traced through subsequent centuries of English history as later generations discovered, modified, and adapted these hidden spaces to serve new purposes, while preserving their essential character as concealed infrastructure that enhanced the capabilities of whatever visible structures existed above ground. During the Second World War, many of these medieval passages were incorporated into modern command facilities that protected Britain's military leadership during the most dangerous phases of the conflict, demonstrating the enduring value of the engineering principles and strategic concepts that had guided their original construction nearly 800 years earlier. The symbolic power of these hidden spaces continues to resonate in modern times, as they represent human ingenuity's triumph over natural limitations and social constraints. The medieval builders who carved these passages through solid chalk created more than mere tunnels. They crafted pathways between different realms of existence, connecting the visible world of public ceremony with the invisible world of private decision-making, the realm of earthly power with the domain of spiritual contemplation, the immediate needs of political survival with the long-term requirements of cultural preservation and transmission. As we emerge from these depths back into the light of the medieval Great Hall, we carry with us awareness of the hidden complexities that underlay even the most straightforward aspects of castle life, the knowledge that secret passages wound through the rock beneath their feet, that hidden chambers housed activities beyond the reach of public observation, that their apparent security rested upon capabilities that remained largely invisible, would have colored every aspect of daily life for those who inhabited these magnificent and mysterious fortresses that dominated the medieval landscape. Picture yourself seated at the high table of a great lord's hall during the height of medieval splendor, where the evening's feast transforms nourishment into elaborate theater, and every dish served carries meanings that extend far beyond mere sustenance. Here, within walls hung with tapestries that shimmer in the light of hundreds of candles, the ritual of noble dining reaches heights of complexity and magnificence that turn simple eating into statements of power, wealth, and cultural sophistication that will be remembered and discussed for months after the last guest has departed. And the final course has been cleared from tables that groan under the weight of culinary artistry. The Great Hall, prepared for this evening's festivities, represents medieval luxury at its most ostentatious and carefully orchestrated. Fresh rushes mixed with herbs whose fragrances rise with every footstep. Carpet the floor in patterns that guide guests toward their appropriate places while creating pathways that facilitate the smooth service of elaborate dishes. The high table, elevated on its dais to ensure that the Lord and his most honored guests command clear views of the entire assembly, bears place settings that represent months of careful preparation and the accumulated wealth of generations. Each place setting tells its own story of status and hierarchy through the materials and craftsmanship of its components. Trenchers, carved from precious woods or fashioned from the finest wheaten bread, await the succession of dishes that will transform them from simple plates into edible foundations for culinary constructions that blur the boundaries between food and art. Salt cellars, their precious contents displayed in vessels of silver, gold, or elaborately carved ivory, mark invisible but absolute boundaries between different levels of social precedence. So seated above the salt, enjoy not only finer food, but also the right to participate freely in conversation, while those below must content themselves with simpler fare, respectful attention to their betters. Discourse. The arrival of the first course signals the beginning of a carefully choreographed performance that will continue for hours. Dish presented with ceremonies that announce its significance while demonstrating the kitchen's capabilities and the host's generosity. Servants, dressed in livery that proclaims their master's wealth and taste, move through the hall with practiced precision, their timing coordinated to ensure that hot dishes remain hot. Cold preparations retain their intended temperatures, and the visual impact of each presentation achieves maximum effect upon guests whose appreciation and subsequent gossip will enhance or diminish the host's reputation throughout the broader noble community. The dishes themselves represent triumphs of medieval culinary artistry that transformed humble ingredients into creations so elaborate they seem to defy both nature and common sense. A roasted peacock, its feathers carefully preserved and replaced after cooking to create the illusion of a living bird that has somehow agreed to present itself for consumption, stands as the centerpiece of the high table's display. The bird's tail feathers, arranged in a spectacular fan that catches and reflects the hall's candlelight, create shifting patterns of color that mesmerize diners while announcing the enormous expense required to procure, prepare, and present such an exotic delicacy. Subtlety, elaborate constructions that combine food with sculpture to create edible artworks grace the spaces between more conventional dishes, their fantastic forms designed to amaze and delight guests while demonstrating the almost magical capabilities of the castle's kitchen staff. A sugar castle, complete with tiny banners and working drawbridge, houses delicate sweets that guests may consume only after admiring the craftsmanship that required weeks of patient work by artisans whose skills rivaled those of goldsmiths or manuscript illuminators. Marzipan figures, shaped and painted to represent saints, heroes, or mythical creatures, blur the boundaries between religious devotion and secular celebration while providing sweet conclusions to savory courses. The wine service that accompanies these elaborate presentations requires its own complex ceremonial protocols. Its different beverages must be matched not only to specific dishes, but to the social status of individual diners and the symbolic requirements of the occasion being celebrated. Servants bearing flagons of precious vintages move through the hall like celebrants in a religious procession, their movements guided by traditions that ensure appropriate wines reach appropriate guests while maintaining the visual splendor that transforms practical service into aesthetic performance. The most expensive wines, imported from distant regions at enormous cost and risk, flow only for the highest-ranking guests. Their rare flavors, serving as liquid symbols of the host's connections to international trading networks and his willingness to spare no expense in honoring those whose friendship or alliance he values most highly. These wines, some aged for decades in carefully tended cellars, represent investments comparable to the purchase of war horses or the construction of chapel buildings. Their consumption an act of conspicuous expenditure that demonstrates wealth, so abundant it can be literally poured out for the pleasure of honored guests. Yet beneath the surface, magnificence of this elaborate feast lies an undercurrent of danger that transforms every shared cup and offered dish into potential instruments of political intrigue and personal destruction. Poison is the weapon of choice for those who lack the strength for open warfare or the courage for face-to-face confrontation. Lurks as a constant possibility in any gathering where political rivals share tables and ambitious enemies pose as gracious hosts. The very abundance and complexity of the feast, which should represent security and celebration, instead creates countless opportunities for those who would use hospitality as a mask for murder. The preparation of food in medieval kitchens. Despite elaborate precautions and careful supervision, offered numerous opportunities for the introduction of deadly substances that could eliminate political rivals while leaving little evidence of deliberate poisoning. Spices imported from distant lands in forms that made identification and purity assessment difficult even for experienced cooks, could easily conceal the bitter tastes or unusual odors that might otherwise reveal the presence of toxic additives. Sauces, complex combinations of ingredients, were jealously guarded secrets known only to the most trusted kitchen staff, provided ideal vehicles for substances that could bring death disguised as delicacy. The symptoms of many common poisons: satin, illness, apparent choking, collapse that might be attributed to excessive eating or drinking, could easily be mistaken for natural causes in an age when medical knowledge remained limited and post-mortem examination was rarely conducted with sufficient skill to detect deliberate poisoning. A guest who fell ill during or shortly after a great feast might be assumed to have succumbed to overeating, bad wine, or divine judgment rather than human malice, allowing poisoners to escape detection while achieving their deadly objectives. Most insidious aspect of poison as a weapon lay in its ability to transform the very symbols of hospitality and honor into instruments of betrayal and death. The shared cup, representing trust and fellowship between host and guest, could become a chalice of destruction. The offered delicacy, symbolizing generosity and respect, might conceal death within its enticing appearance. The elaborate ceremony surrounding food service, tended to demonstrate the host's magnificence and the guest's honored status, could mask preparations for murder that violated every principle of medieval hospitality and Christian morality. The medieval kitchen that produced these elaborate feasts operated as a complex laboratory where culinary artistry intersected with practical chemistry, creating dishes that pushed the boundaries of what seemed possible while requiring knowledge and skills that bordered on the magical. Master cooks, whose reputations commanded salaries comparable to those of knights or court officials, possessed understanding of ingredients, techniques, and presentations that transformed raw materials into edible sculptures whose visual impact rivaled their gustatory pleasures. These culinary alchemists worked with substances drawn from across the known world, combining exotic spices with local ingredients to create flavors that transported diners into realms of sensory experience previously unknown to Northern European palates. The spice trade that supplied medieval kitchens with their most precious ingredients represented one of the era's most dangerous and profitable commercial enterprises, as merchants risked life and fortune to transport tiny quantities of aromatic substances across continents and seas where bandits, storms, and political upheavals could destroy years of investment in moments of catastrophic loss. Pepper, worth its weight in silver, arrived in European ports after journeys that might consume months or years. Its precious grains, carefully counted and weighed, by merchants who understood that fortunes could be made or lost, through variations measured in ounces rather than pounds. Cinnamon bark, stripped from trees growing in distant Ceylon and transported through trading networks that connected the Indian Ocean to Mediterranean ports, commanded prices that placed it beyond the reach of any but the wealthiest nobles. Its warm, sweet fragrance could transform simple dishes into exotic delicacies that proclaimed the host's international connections and unlimited resources. Cloves, whose journey from the Molucca Islands to European tables involved transfers between dozens of merchants and transportation by every conceivable means of medieval commerce, added flavors so intense that single buds could alter the character of entire dishes. The most precious spice of all, saffron, derived from the stamens of crocus flowers that required hand harvesting by workers, could collect only tiny quantities despite hours of patient labor-represented luxury so extreme that its use became a political statement about the user's status and power. The golden threads, lighter than silk and more valuable than gold, could transform colorless sauces into brilliant yellow preparations that seemed to capture sunlight within their depths, while adding subtle flavors that enhanced, rather than overwhelmed, the natural tastes of carefully prepared ingredients. Yet these same exotic substances that made medieval cuisine so spectacular also provided ideal vehicles for the poisons that lurked as constant threats at noble tables. The strong flavors and unusual tastes that characterized heavily spiced dishes could easily mask the bitter or metallic notes that might otherwise reveal the presence of deadly additives. Arsenic, readily available to those who knew where to seek it, could be disguised within sauces whose complexity made detection virtually impossible even for experienced palates, trained to recognize unusual flavors. Mercury, obtained from cinnabar or through processes known to alchemists and metallurgists, provided another means of achieving death through apparent natural causes, as its symptoms mimicked those of various diseases that commonly afflicted medieval populations. The metal's liquid form made it easy to incorporate into wine or other beverages, while its relatively slow action allowed poisoners to be elsewhere. When their victims finally succumbed to what would appear to be sudden illness rather than deliberate murder, plant-based poisons offered even more insidious possibilities, as many deadly substances could be derived from materials that might legitimately appear in castle gardens or herb stores maintained for medicinal purposes. Wolfsbane, despite its sinister reputation, grew wild in many regions and could be gathered without attracting attention by anyone with knowledge of its appearance and properties. While properly prepared and administered, its effects could be delayed long enough to allow the poisoner to establish alibis while ensuring that the victim's death would not be immediately connected to any specific meal or beverage. Belladonna, whose beautiful berries concealed deadly alkaloids, provided another weapon for those skilled in its preparation and application. The plant's dual nature, useful in tiny quantities for treating certain medical conditions, lethal in larger doses, made its presence in castle herb gardens unsuspicious, while ensuring that knowledgeable poisoners would have access to deadly materials without the need for suspicious transactions or dangerous smuggling operations. The preparation of these poisons required knowledge that existed at the intersection of medicine, alchemy, and practical chemistry, skills possessed by individuals whose education and social position provided them with access to both materials and information while ensuring their activities would not attract unwanted scrutiny. Court physicians, trained in the universities of Salerno or Montpellier, possessed understanding of human physiology and pharmaceutical principles that made them capable of administering death with scientific precision. Monastery infirmarians, whose duties included preparing medications from herbs grown in abbey gardens, could easily acquire and process materials that served both healing and deadly purposes. The testing of food and drink for poison became an elaborate ritual that attempted to provide security while acknowledging the real dangers that lurked within the most innocent appearing dishes. Professional food tasters, usually drawn from trusted household servants whose loyalty had been proven through years of faithful service, risked their lives with every meal to protect their masters from death disguised as hospitality. These individuals, whose survival depended upon their ability to detect subtle tastes or delayed reactions that might indicate poisoning, developed sensitive palates and careful observation skills that made them valuable but always expendable guardians against culinary assassination. The implements used for testing special spoons, made from materials believed to change color in the presence of certain poisons. Cups carved from unicorn horn or other substances thought to neutralize toxic materials. Rings set with stones that supposedly revealed contamination through changes in their appearance represented attempts to apply magical thinking to practical security problems. While most of these devices possessed no actual protective properties, their psychological impact on both potential poisoners and intended victims created deterrent effects that may have prevented some attempts at culinary murder. The rituals surrounding wine service included elaborate ceremonies designed to demonstrate that beverages had not been tampered with during their journey from cellar to table. The ceremonial opening of wine vessels in full view of guests, the pouring of first portions for the host's personal consumption, and the careful observation of servers' reactions to the beverages they handled all formed part of complex protocols intended to provide security while maintaining the dignity and magnificence appropriate to noble hospitality. Yet, determined poisoners found ways to circumvent even the most elaborate precautions, using knowledge of timing, chemistry, and human psychology to achieve their deadly objectives despite extensive protective measures. Slow-acting poisons could be administered hours or even days before their effects became apparent, making it virtually impossible to trace the source of contamination or identify the responsible parties. Substances that became toxic only when combined with other materials allowed poisoners to deliver components separately, ensuring that detection would be impossible until the deadly combination had already been consumed. The psychological impact of poison as a constant threat transformed every aspect of noble dining, from joyous celebration into carefully managed security operations where pleasure remained secondary to survival. Guests learned to watch their hosts carefully, observing whether dishes were shared or whether special preparations were reserved for specific individuals, the etiquette of refusing certain dishes without giving offense, of requesting that host taste offerings before accepting them, and of maintaining alertness throughout lengthy meals became essential survival skills for anyone who moved within circles where political ambition might manifest itself through culinary assassination. The social dynamics created by this constant awareness of danger influenced relationships throughout noble society, as trust became a precious commodity that could never be taken for granted, even among family members or long-standing allies. The knowledge that poison could transform any feast into a funeral created atmospheres of subtle tension that underlay even the most magnificent celebrations, reminding participants that medieval luxury existed within contexts where death remained an ever-present possibility disguised as generous hospitality. The economic implications of maintaining security against poisoning added substantial costs to the already enormous expenses required to host elaborate feasts worthy of noble status. Food tasters commanded high wages due to the obvious risks of their profession, while the specialized equipment required for testing dishes and beverages represented significant investments in items whose effectiveness remained largely theoretical. The additional staff required to maintain chains of custody for ingredients, supervise food preparation at every stage, and to monitor the serving of completed dishes, multiplied the human resources needed to produce meals that guests could consume with reasonable confidence in their safety. The procurement of ingredients for major feasts required security measures that rivaled those used for transporting treasure or military supplies, as the vulnerability of food supplies to contamination created opportunities for enemies to strike at their targets without gaining access to castle interiors or overcoming physical defenses. Trusted merchants, whose loyalty had been proven through years of reliable service, commanded premium prices for spices, wines, and other luxury items that would appear on noble tables. The transportation of these materials required armed escorts, sealed containers, and careful documentation that would enable investigators to trace any problems back to their sources. As the evening's feast reaches its spectacular climax, the Great Hall transforms into a theater where every gesture carries meaning and every shared moment becomes part of a complex social drama that will influence relationships and political alliances for years to come. The final courses arrive with ceremonies that surpass even the elaborate presentations that have characterized the evening's earlier stages. As master cooks and their assistants create culinary spectacles that push the boundaries of possibility while demonstrating their absolute mastery over ingredients, techniques, artistic vision that seems almost supernatural in its sophistication and ambition. The peace, the resistance, wheeled into the hall on a specially constructed cart that requires 4 strong men to maneuver through the assembled guests takes the form of an entire roasted swan, its neck curved in lifelike elegance, its feathers restored and arranged with such skill that the bird appears to be sleeping rather than dead. The swan's breast has been carefully carved and reassembled around stuffing made from exotic ingredients, fine nuts from Italian forests, dried fruits from Mediterranean orchards, spices from Asian markets so distant their names sound like incantations when spoken aloud by Northern Europeans, tongues unaccustomed to such foreign syllables surrounding this magnificent centerpiece. Smaller dishes create a landscape of culinary artistry that tells stories through food, each element positioned with mathematical precision to create visual narratives that educated guests can read like illuminated manuscripts written in the language of sugar, spice, and carefully sculpted meat. Miniature castles constructed from marzipan and painted with edible gold. House delicate sweets that guests may claim only after admiring the craftsmanship that required weeks of patient work, by artisans whose skills with sugar rival those of goldsmiths working precious metals. The wines served with these final courses represent the pinnacle of medieval viticultural achievement. Their contents drawn from vineyards whose grapes have been tended with religious devotion by generations of vintners who understand that great wine requires not merely skill but patience measured in decades rather than seasons. These precious vintages, some aged for 20 years or more in carefully maintained cellars, flow like liquid history from flagons whose silver surfaces reflect the faces of diners, privileged to taste beverages that represent the accumulated wisdom and artistry of entire lifetimes devoted to the pursuit of fineness, perfection. Yet even as guests marveled at these spectacular presentations and savor flavors that transport them into realms of sensory experience beyond anything available to common mortals, the subtle undercurrents of danger continue to flow beneath the surface magnificence. Careful observers, trained by necessity to watch for signs of distress or unusual behavior, monitor their fellow diners for symptoms that might indicate the presence of poison, despite all precautions taken to ensure the safety of the evening's offerings. The delayed action of many toxic substances means that death might still claim victims hours after they have returned to their chambers, their lives ebbing away in private agony while other guests sleep peacefully, unaware that murder has been committed beneath the cover of lavish hospitality. The entertainment that accompanies these final courses provides distraction from such dark thoughts while creating opportunities for further displays of wealth and cultural sophistication. Troubadours, their voices trained in the sophisticated musical traditions of southern France, perform songs that weave together themes of love, honor, and adventure in ways that reflect and idealize the lives of their noble audience. Their melodies, accompanied by instruments whose construction required the skills of master craftsmen working with rare woods and precious metals, filled the hall with sounds that seemed to transform ordinary air into something precious and sustaining. Acrobats and jugglers, their performances, choreographed to complement rather than overshadow the culinary presentations, create displays of physical skill that mirrored the technical achievements of the kitchen staff while providing visual spectacles that keep guests entertained during the lengthy intervals required for clearing dishes and preparing the next course. Their costumes, sewn from fabrics that shimmer in the candlelight and decorated with bells whose tinkling creates musical accompaniment to their movements, transform simple athletic displays into artistic performances worthy of the magnificent setting. The gradual conclusion of the feast follows rituals that ensure every guest understands their place in the social hierarchy while providing opportunities for the host to demonstrate favor, displeasure through subtle variations in ceremony and protocol. The washing of hands that follows the final course becomes an elaborate dance of precedence, as servants bearing ewers of scented water and fine linen, towels move through the hall in carefully prescribed patterns that reinforce the evening's lessons about power, privilege, and proper behavior within the complex social structure that governs noble society. The distribution of gifts that traditionally concludes major feasts provides final opportunities for hosts to reward loyalty, encourage future support, or send subtle messages about political relationships that extend far beyond the immediate occasion. These presence rings bearing precious stones, links of silk or fur, weapons decorated with silver fittings, books copied on the finest parchment, carry meanings that recipients will study and interpret for weeks after the feast's conclusion. Each gift representing not merely generosity, but carefully calculated investment in political relationships that might prove crucial during future crises. The departure of guests follows protocols that ensure proper respect is shown to individuals of varying ranks while maintaining the dignity of both hosts and visitors throughout the complex process of leave-taking. The most important guests receive personal escorts to their chambers, their paths through the castle's corridors lined with servants bearing torches that create processions worthy of royal occasions. Lesser nobles, their status acknowledged through less elaborate but still respectful ceremonies, make their way to guest quarters that have been prepared with care appropriate to their social positions and political importance. The aftermath of such magnificent occasions reveals the enormous human and material costs required to sustain the illusion of effortless abundance that characterizes noble luxury at its finest. Kitchen staff, exhausted from days of preparation and hours of intense service, begin the massive task of cleaning vessels, storing leftover ingredients, preparing equipment for the next round of entertaining that inevitably follows major social events. The financial accounting that follows great feasts often reveals expenditures that would be sufficient to maintain modest households for entire years, as the cost of ingredients, wine, entertainment, and gifts reaches levels that strain even the wealthiest treasuries. The political consequences of successful feasts extend far beyond their immediate social impact. As guests carry memories of magnificent hospitality back to their own domains, where stories of lavish entertainment become part of the host's reputation throughout the broader noble community. These accounts, embellished through repeated telling, create legends of generosity and magnificence that enhance political authority, while establishing standards of hospitality that other nobles must attempt to match if they hope to maintain their own social positions within the competitive hierarchy of medieval court society. Yet, the darker possibilities that lurk beneath such magnificent occasions continue to influence political relationships long after the last guests have departed, and the great hall has been restored to its everyday configuration. Rumors of poison attempts, whether real or imagined, spread through noble society like plagues, creating atmospheres of suspicion and mistrust that can destroy alliances and friendships built over decades of careful cultivation. The knowledge that any invitation to feast might conceal deadly intentions transforms social interaction into elaborate games of mutual surveillance where pleasure remains secondary to survival. The medical consequences of suspected poisoning create their own forms of political crisis as physicians summoned to treat mysterious illnesses must navigate between their obligations to heal and their awareness that incorrect diagnosis might have serious political implications. The symptoms of many poisons closely resemble those of natural diseases, making accurate diagnosis difficult even for the most skilled medical practitioners. While the political pressures surrounding high-profile cases often encourage physicians to provide explanations that satisfy political necessities rather than medical evidence, the investigation of suspected poisoning attempts requires delicate balancing of justice and diplomacy, as accusations of attempted murder against powerful nobles can destabilize entire regions, while failure to pursue such charges might encourage future attacks. The collection of evidence in cases where the alleged crime involves substances that leave few traces and symptoms that might have natural causes presents challenges that would test even modern forensic capabilities. While medieval investigators must work with limited scientific knowledge and tools that provide more symbolic than practical value in determining guilt or innocence, as the candles burn lower in their holders and the last echoes of conversation fade from the great hall, we are left with images of medieval luxury that revealed both its magnificent achievements and its constant dangers. The same wealth and skill that created edible masterpieces and transformed simple meals into spectacular entertainments also provided means and motives for political murder disguised as generous hospitality. The very abundance that should have provided security instead created vulnerabilities that enemies could exploit, while the trust required for social interaction remained constantly threatened by awareness that death might lurk within the most innocent peering offerings. The servants who remained to clear the remnants of this magnificent feast work by the dying light of torches and candles, their movements creating shifting shadows that dance across tapestried walls and transform the great hall into a space that seems to exist between the solid reality of day and the mysterious possibilities of night. Each dish removed, each cup cleared, each decorative element carefully stored away for future use represents the dismantling of an elaborate illusion that, for a few hours, created the appearance that abundance could overcome scarcity, that ceremony could master chaos, and that human ingenuity could triumph over the fundamental uncertainties that governed medieval existence. The empty tables, their surfaces scarred by years of use, yet polished to gleaming smoothness for each occasion, stand as silent witnesses to countless similar gatherings where power and vulnerability danced together in intricate patterns that determined the fates of individuals and kingdoms alike. The rushes beneath these tables, trampled and stained by the evening's activities, will be swept away and replaced with fresh materials that will, in turn, absorb the evidence of future feasts, where similar dramas of magnificence and menace will play out according to scripts written by ambition, necessity, and the eternal human desire to transform mere survival into something approaching art. And so, dear listener, our gentle journey through the shadowed corridors and candlelit halls of medieval castle life draws to its peaceful close. We have walked together through stone chambers where luxury meant far more than simple comfortware. It represented security carved from uncertainty, beauty wrested from harshness, and human dignity maintained against overwhelming odds. From the daily routines of castle stewards managing complex households to the international intrigues of Eleanor of Aquitaine. From the secret passages hidden beneath Dover's ancient stones to the magnificent, yet perilous banquets that defined noble society. We have explored a world where every comfort came with its price and every privilege carried its own distinctive forms of danger. Tonight, as you rest in the simple luxury of modern safety, consider how different your world is from the one we have visited together. Your bed, comfortable without requiring the labor of dozens of servants, sits within walls that protect without imprising, under roofs that shelter without isolating you from the broader world beyond. The food you eat arrives without ceremony, but also without the constant fear that each meal might be your last, while the water you drink flows clear and pure without requiring the vigilance of professional tasters or the elaborate precautions that transformed every cup into a potential weapon. The very air you breathe carries no whispers of conspiracy, no subtle sense of herbs that might conceal deadly purposes, no undercurrents of political intrigue that could transform hospitality into homicide at any moment. Your rest comes unguarded by armed men, untroubled by the knowledge that secret passages might carry enemies through the darkness, unbroken by the need to maintain constant vigilance against threats that could emerge from shadows, both literal and metaphorical. The luxuries that surrounded medieval castle life, the finest silks and furs, the most exotic spices and rarest wines, the most skillful craftsmanship and elaborate ceremonies existed within contexts where beauty and danger intertwined so closely that they became almost indistinguishable. Every tapestry that graced castle walls also concealed stone surfaces that wept with dampness. Every magnificent feast created opportunities for those who would use abundance as a cover for assassination. Every display of wealth announced to potential enemies the valuable prizes that awaited successful conquest. Yet perhaps the greatest luxury I've discovered in our exploration of this distant world lies not in any material comfort or elaborate ceremony, but in the simple recognition that human beings, faced with circumstances that would challenge the hardiest souls, found ways to create beauty, maintain dignity, and preserve hope against seemingly impossible odds. The medieval men and women who inhabited these fortress homes, who navigated the treacherous currents of court politics, who built hidden passages through solid rock and transformed simple ingredients into culinary masterpieces, who maintained elaborate social hierarchies while constantly adapting to changing circumstances. These individuals created forms of civilization that endured for centuries despite existing within conditions of uncertainty that modern minds can barely comprehend. Their luxury was not merely a matter of possessing beautiful objects or eating expensive foods, but rather the achievement of creating ordered, meaningful lives within environments where chaos constantly threatened to overwhelm. Human efforts at creating stability and beauty. The true magnificence of medieval castle culture lay in its demonstration that human creativity, determination, and social cooperation could transform even the most challenging circumstances into opportunities for achievement that inspire wonder and admiration across the centuries that separate their world from ours. The steward, whose daily rounds we followed through castle corridors, managing resources and coordinating activities that kept complex households functioning smoothly, embodied the practical wisdom that made medieval luxury possible through attention to detail and dedication to duty that transformed administrative necessity into forms of art. Eleanor of Aquitaine, whose extraordinary life spanned nearly the entire length of the high medieval period, demonstrated that individual intelligence and determination could transcend even the most restrictive social circumstances to achieve influence and authority that shaped the destinies of nations. The secret passages beneath Dover Castle remind us that medieval builders possessed engineering capabilities and strategic vision that enabled them to create infrastructure whose value extended far beyond its immediate practical applications, while the magnificent banquets that concluded our journey revealed how medieval society transformed the basic necessity of nourishment into elaborate expressions of cultural achievement that pushed the boundaries of what seemed possible within the material constraints of their era, as sleep begins to call you toward rest and dreams. Carry with you the image of those candlelit halls where our medieval ancestors created their own forms of luxury within stone walls that have long since crumbled among people whose names have been forgotten, in circumstances that exist now only in the gentle memories we have shared together tonight. Their world has passed away, but their achievements in creating beauty, maintaining hope, and preserving human dignity under the most challenging circumstances continue to inspire those who take the time to remember their stories and honor their remarkable legacy. Rest now in the comfort of your safe, warm, present, grateful for the simple luxuries that surround you, soft pillows that require no servants to fluff, clean sheets that need no ceremony to bless, and the peaceful darkness that holds no hidden passages, no whispered conspiracies, no elaborate protocols governing the simple act of closing your eyes and allowing sleep to carry you gently into dreams where the past and present blend into timeless visions of human achievement, triumphing over uncertainty, beauty emerging from harshness, and the eternal hope that tomorrow will bring new opportunities to create meaning from the raw materials of existence. The castle walls we have explored tonight stand empty now, their stones weathered by centuries of rain and wind, their great halls silent except for the footsteps of tourists and scholars who seek to understand lives so different from their own. Yet in the quiet spaces of memory and imagination, these ancient stones continue to echo with the voices of those who once called them home. Told daily struggles and extraordinary achievements remind us that luxury, in its truest form, lies not in the accumulation of possessions, but in the creation of lives that honor both human potential and the challenging circumstances within which that potential must always express itself. Sleep well, gentle listener, and let your dreams carry you to peaceful places where the lessons of the past enrich the present without disturbing the rest that prepares you for whatever challenges and opportunities tomorrow may bring to your own life within this remarkable world we share.